Welcome to Health Facts with Normani Ricks. I'm your host, Normani Ricks. I like to start off each episode with a little known health fact. Did you know that there are over 200 million tons of plastics currently in the ocean? That's not good. I have the honor and pleasure of having Dr. Aly Cohen with me on the show today. Dr. Cohen is a board certified physician practicing in rheumatology and integrative medicine, as well as an environmental health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. Her new book, Detoxify: The Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them, is available now. It seeks to connect the dots between everyday chemicals and the epidemic rise in immune disorders and autoimmune diseases. Dr. Cohen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Norman. I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Mhm. So let's talk some about your new book. What do you want consumers to know?
Well, what I'm going to try to explain is how our environment plays a key role in our health, and now making changes to things that we probably don't even think are harming us can actually change the destiny of our health picture moving forward and in that of our kids. So it's one of those things where you have to convince people that what we're doing that we enjoy and that we like and that we have a lot of exposures that we don't think much about actually could potentially harm us, and then how to reduce those exposures in a very simple, practical way.
Okay. Lately, there's been a lot of things on the news about plastics and a
Mhm.
lot of microplastics in our water bottles and water supplies, where I think people weren't really paying attention to that before. Do you have any insight on that?
For sure. So plastics have gotten a lot of attention because we can see them, we can feel them, we know what we're used to surrounding ourselves a little bit with plastics. But when we start thinking of them getting stuck in our organs, like our kidneys, our lungs, they're now found in the placenta of pregnant women who give birth. They're found in the brain at autopsy. And basically, microplastics are less than 5 millimeters in size. They're very, 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 very tiny plastics, and nanoplastics are even smaller, and we're able to find those as well in the human body. And we start to get like upset because we're like, how is this being put into our bodies? Who's letting this chemicals, these plastics into products that break down into our bodies? And microplastics are becoming a bigger problem in terms of just visibility of what we know about them, but they contain chemicals that are actually quite harmful. And that's some of what I do with the work in the book Detoxify. We have a lot of chemicals that are not regulated in the US market at all. Even chemicals in products we love, like cosmetics and personal care products, in cleaning products, even in food packaging, like cans, like plastics that line interiors of cans. So what I'm trying to share with people is, yes, we can get upset or we can be proactive. And I choose to be proactive. And I want people to feel empowered and not defeated. And a lot of it is just making very simple, practical changes, like switching from, plastic, cookware, plastic spatulas, plastic food storage, and trying to figure out if you can just get glass, which is very affordable and attainable for storage, stainless steel for carrying your water, or glass bottles instead of drinking lots of plastic, bottles on the go. Turns out there can be up to 240,000 microplastics per 1 liter bottle. So we want to be thinking about smart choices, even if you can't entirely see them and feel them, and they don't actually smack you in the face with a problem like a rash or something like that. But knowing that they're in our bodies should make people a little bit aware that they could potentially cause health issues.
Right. I remember I went on a trip to Lusaka, Zambia, and everything was still in like glass bottles, like the Coke bottles, and like everybody still like ate off of like regular plates and used regular forks. It wasn't plastic, no plasticware. And then I came back to the United States and I looked up like all the epidemiology reports because I was very curious. So I looked
Mhm.
at like the United States cancer rate versus their cancer rate, and it was astonishing. So like back then, that was probably like 10, 15 years ago. I was like, oh, it's got to be the plastics. That's why that's why so many Americans are sick with cancer. But it's just other countries that are just not that into plastics like we are. So I just I'm very interested in like the epidemiology of it all.
Yeah, the fact is that the most under modernized worlds, which still rely on whole foods, less processed foods. If you go to Costa Rica, I was there with my kids. I mean, you couldn't find a fast food restaurant for, like literally miles. Like I think I saw one the whole time I was down there. The idea is that plastics aren't just in our containers and our soda bottles, but they're really also in the foods that we eat, the wrappers that we eat, and also the chemicals that are often used in plastics as well are also in food as food ingredients that are unregulated. So the more processed, the more humans get their hands on our food and our drinking water, the more that humans play a role in the sourcing and quality of our food to make it into something it's not, the more we're going to absorb those chemicals that are now shown to be harmful, not just to cancer risk, which your point is well taken, but also to the things like you wouldn't think of, like weight gain. We know that many of these chemicals that are in plastics affect our hormones. They affect, our bodies like low-level estrogens or low-level testosterone, or affect insulin, which is a hormone, or thyroid hormone. They can affect weight gain or the inability to lose weight. They can affect hormone-sensitive cancers that are specific, like breast cancer, testicular, uterine. They can also affect the immune system, which, as a rheumatologist, as you introduced me, been a rheumatologist for 22 years. I still practice here in New Jersey. And the fact of the matter is that whatever I'm noticing, which is quite a bit in terms of just the increase of autoimmune disease, is not just in every population, but young people and people who have no family history of these diseases is something that's mirrored around the world. We now have 7 to 14% of the US population has some type of autoimmune disease. And these are not necessarily also immune disorders like food allergies, not just directing to ourselves, but even directing to the world around us, like foods that we normally wouldn't have had a problem with. So a lot of this is tied to exposures to chemicals that are in our bodies that are triggering the immune system, making us inflamed. And it's a really complicated system, the immune system, for good reason. We've developed it over millions of years to do its job, which is to see foreign material and react to it. Well, guess what? We have lots of foreign material now, especially in the last 100 years, since all these chemicals have been, really shot up in terms of production. And the goal is to move backwards. It's to get away from these chemicals. It's try to reduce our exposure by choosing better, choosing less, swapping out to cleaner products. And it's all doable, and it's all doable without a lot of cost. And so that's my goal as an educator, is to bring that to people.
There's been a lot in the news lately about the dyes that we are allowed in our food. So can you
Mm.
talk more about the different dyes and what's bad for you?
Yeah, great question. So red dye number three was the one that got a lot of attention. Interestingly enough, it was pretty much considered harmful to human health, so much so that 20 years ago, it was actually banned from personal care products and cosmetics. And now that we're ingesting it, you'd think that would have been top on the list, right? Instead of just putting it on our skin, which can be absorbed, but certainly not as aggressive as eating and drinking these chemicals. But red dye number three was really associated with a lot of behavioral issues in children, and certainly some very well done studies in animals that showed an increased risk for cancer development. In fact, Europe doesn't even use red dye number three for the most part, but we still have it in medications. We still have it in a lot of things that make things red or orange or that kind of tone. So the idea that red dye number three is just one of literally thousands of food chemicals that have actually made their way into the food system under a very weak legislation called generally regarded as safe, or GRAS. And this is up for discussion all over the place because GRAS basically let every chemical you can imagine, when it was only really originally intended for vinegar and salt back in the 1930s. But it's opened the door for so many companies to throw chemicals into their processed foods that now we're secondarily trying to figure out how much harm they cause to human health. And so we know a lot. So again, the kind of argument would be, all right, do you have to know every dye? Do you have to wait for every dye to get removed from the market? No. In fact, my argument, I don't care kind of who heads politics or who's the head of this or what's taken out. It's too slow. It's too slow for human health. And we are here now. Our kids are here now. If you want to have kids in the future, now is the time to do it for yourself and not wait for regulation or a new, heads of government to fight over what can and can't be in our food and in our drinking water. And so I've never, wanted to get into the nuances of timing for these chemicals because again, we have to still worry about all the other ones that haven't even been brought to the table for scrutiny.
Well, I think lately I've heard about blue and yellow, which I know red was a big thing for a while, but I guess now, like if you were a person and you wanted to go in the grocery store, like what do you look at for on the back of the box?
Yeah, great question. So, in general, everything in the middle of the supermarket aisles are the ones that are in many ways processed, predominantly processed foods, okay? Because they require no refrigeration and they sit in areas where they can be on the shelf for like years, perhaps. What you want to try to think about is moving towards foods that are have a shelf life, that are fresh, fruits, vegetables, or what I tell people is frozen organic foods. Organic is a really important designation in the food system. And I have now, like, literally screaming on mountaintops that people should be really thinking about USDA frozen organic foods. And I'll see if I have I'm snacking on a cereal right now. That is what USD organic looks like. That's the label you want to see on anything that you eat or drink if it's accessible. But frozen USDA organic produce, which is very accessible, every big box supermarket around the country typically has their own line of them because they know it's so lucrative. It makes money for them. But frozen organics have this really interesting added benefit. Besides being USDA organic, which limits thousands of potential chemicals like pesticides and fertilizer chemicals in the food, red dye number three, yellow, blues, all of the synthetic dyes, colors, preservatives are not allowed in USDA organic food. It is literally the only regulation that has any teeth in this country, pretty much for anything. So when I'm trying to get people to think, look for that seal, but frozen produce, especially when it's picked, it's flash frozen, it's frozen immediately, which maintains all of its nutritional value. And so when you buy frozen USDA organic, you get this added benefit of nutrition that's critical to the human body and protecting it from all sorts of illnesses. But you get this also, lack of pesticide chemicals as well. So that to me is now becoming, unfortunately, because we used to think fresh foods from the ground would be so great. But a lot of the supermarket fresh foods travel very long distances. And as they travel, they lose their nutritional value. And so that's why I look at USDA organic as a way of democratizing food, choice and food health, because now it's the price points are low enough, but now people are going to start learning about how to do that. And you can just transfer them from the plastic bags. I mean, no one likes plastic bags. But again, we're at the whim of our food system unless you're growing your own. So I just tell people remove the produce, don't use in-bag steaming bags because that just adds microplastics while you're cooking to at high temperatures. Just remove them and put them in a glass Pyrex or stainless steel container to heat or microwave, that kind of thing. And that really does reduce microplastics, it reduces chemicals, and then you have this great nutrition. If you want to just steam them, that's even better instead of microwaving.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's talk about the 4 A's of environmental health management.
Yeah, so I teach a lot of different groups, high school, college, other doctors about environmental chemicals. It's called environmental health as a topic. And I was really struggling with how to present this pretty difficult to some people, I mean, a lot of people actually, and very, broad topic in a way that made sense to me. So I started trying out different ways to do it. So I came up with something called the 4 A's of environmental health navigation. And it's very simplified for good reason. The first A is assess. So within the book, which of course I'm going to show you because this means so much to me, took 4 years to write. Within the book, there's a 50 question survey. So in order to assess what the problems are, you actually have to kind of answer some of these questions like, do I filter my water or not? it's not judgment, it's just to get a really good baseline assessment of what your exposures are so that you can work on it in different ways at your own pace, you know? But the 50 questions are pretty reasonable stuff for every human, especially every American. Do you dry clean your clothes? And then you get a point system, and then you add up your points at the end. Once you assess, then you have the basis to move forward to making changes, which is the second A. The second A is avoid or swap. And avoid is so critical because we have been marketed to buy so many cleaners for our home, a doorknob cleaner, a sink cleaner, an oven cleaner, carpet cleaner, surface cleaner, air fresheners. We have been marketed over the years to be buying these products that are so loaded with chemicals that eventually get into our bodies and into our kids. We can measure them. Um, and so assessing is the first step, but avoiding, maybe cutting back on the number of cleaning products. I put in, kind of do it yourself surface cleaner that's good for any kind of surface. It doesn't have to be just, a surface in the kitchen, but not in the bathroom. But we want to be able to also look up products, say you don't have time or energy to make your own products, which I totally get. You want to be able to have the right resources to purchase the ones that are the least toxic with the least chemicals, least fragrance, least perfumes that are harmful. And so assess can do that, but then avoid, and then swapping for better products is the second A. The third A is add. And that goes back to this idea that we are so nutritionally undernourished as modern day humans. We're not getting what we need. We've heard about vitamin D, not getting enough vitamin D. D3 is really what it is. But we're also not getting magnesium and iron in the right amount, and vitamin C and all the Bs. We are human beings that need to thrive on nutrition. We have done this for millions of years. The ad is which foods, and I give 100 of them in the book on a list. These are the foods that help us thrive. These are the foods that help build our detoxification pathways to manage chemicals we can't control. These are the foods and nutritionally rich foods that really build up our body's ability to fight off bad stuff, including cancers. So that's the ad, which also includes exercise and lifestyle and why they matter and how much sleep plays into also clearing our chemicals during the day. So we have at night, we can wash them out. The fourth A is based on my own journey of, hey, I don't want to give up my hair coloring. And maybe I'm going to a birthday party and I want to have a big piece of cake with lots of colored, horrible, icing. Or maybe I'm traveling and I just don't care. And I really want to just have fun. I want the allow. And I think it's important for all of us is that if you're going to make changes, you want to have an allow so that you can be kind to yourself, that you could work through these topics very reasonably and not be mad at yourself if you're not scoring success on some level. I'm not a purist, I'm a realist. And I think that makes people much more able to embrace change than if everything's black and white or 100% or nothing.
I agree. I agree. I also wanted to ask you about what other educational projects you're working on.
Yeah, well, I have courses. If people want to take sort of some courses that are really easy, I think, you never know how much people know about the topic, but I've really tried to put out some really, my website is called thesmarthuman.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Blue Sky on The Smart Human with Aly Cohen or thesmarthuman.com website. But the website is housing links to my courses that are very reasonable, but very, I think, important that people get good information from science-based research. And they're not long courses, but if you're interested, one's on pesticides, one's on drinking water, one is on integrative rheumatology. If you're trying to understand how the way I practice rheumatology, really bringing into diet, nutrition, and all these other components, not just drugs, into management of rheumatologic conditions. I have a course up there just to kind of understand that. So it's just, poke around. It's all thesmarthuman.com. But I also teach at 3 different programs for physicians. So it's almost the same material. It's just, is it 8th graders or is it physicians? I can tell you there's a lot of lack of information across both demographics because we're not really taught to know this material, even in med school. So to me, we're all sort of starting at baseline.
Okay, great, great, great. So moving forward, I did read that in Japan, some of their scientists have made some plastics that are biodegradable. So when you put them in the sea, they dissolve. So what can we do as a nation, and how can we educate others to maybe think forward thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably multiple avenues to help us all out. From my perspective, I'm teaching people how to avoid these exposures that are here and now in our lives. But then there's the people that are really fighting on Capitol Hill and really trying to make changes to the actual legislation. And then there are the people, the scientists that are really trying to pursue what's called green chemistry, where they're trying at the start of making either a compound, a chemical, or a product, they're really putting thought into not just what that product does and how successful it is, but how does it break down when we're done using it? What does it do to the environment where it's landing in, a landfill? How does it affect the water systems that are related to that landfill? And water systems cycle back right into human beings because we get our water from water cleaning programs, and treatment plants, which are very inefficient, especially in the United States. And it's certainly why I tell everyone to try to filter your water with either a pitcher, which is a carbon block, or a refrigerator, but even more so to reverse osmosis, which are now $275 units that you can order, put underneath your kitchen sink, and a plumber to make it easier to have it around and working without having to fill it up is like $150 for 1 hour. So I put it all in the book. I don't want people to feel overwhelmed by our conversation, but I think the take home is that we have a lot of work to do, every one of us, and it just depends on what avenue you feel you have the most ability to educate. And look, moms can educate other moms, dads can educate other dads. You can even educate your own doctors and say to your pediatrician, what do you think about food quality and chemicals? Do you think that organic matters? Do you think I should try to change? There's always good conversation when it's done in a reasonable, respectful way. And I just think that everyone can play a role depending on what their comfort level is.
Well, Dr. Aly, this has been very informative, and I appreciate you so much for coming on to the show today. Is there anything that you would like to leave for the listeners?
Well, I hope listeners don't feel overwhelmed. This is a conversation that we're going to hear more and more about. And keeping in mind a couple points, we are not regulated for environmental chemicals. We have over 95,000 of them now in everything we love and all the toys we have and everything we do. But the idea is that they were really never tested for safety. We got to pull back a little bit in how much we buy off of TikTok, unregulated, unvetted stuff. With my kids and my high school classes, I go to websites like EWG.org. EWG.org stands for Environmental Working Group. Or Clearia is a great app, Yuka, and you can look up products. You can look up cleaning products. And all of that is in the book. Like, I want people to know there's a place for all of the best resources and recipes, and even a 21-day plan for people who are just trying to start out on this but don't know how to get going. Day one, day two, day three. It's very simple. So I want people to feel that they're supported, that this is not a challenge. This is not an area of regret if you are sick or have sick kids. This is about moving forward and doing your own thing to keep empowered and confident. But I'm thrilled that people are listening if you're still listening. And check out thesmarthuman.com and follow on social media and get some great tips even for free.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Normani. Thank you all. And thank you for introducing me again to your audience. I appreciate it.